Hello.
Yeah, hi. Is this Dr. Tao?
Yes, speaking.
Yeah, hi. This is Rod Berger from Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
I was ready for the interview. Is this a good time for you, sir?
This is fine, yes. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Well, I will start by just saying I really enjoyed the masterclass. So I had quite a weekend of learning, so I do appreciate it. And I think more importantly, as a dad, I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Right. How old are your kids?
I have two kids. I have a 9 and a 7-year-old, and my 9-year-old son loves math. But our struggle, we'll talk about this in the interview, is that in the education system, in public education, he can't get enough mathematics to support his craving. So it's been quite a challenge for us, I guess, as parents to find ways to stimulate his enthusiasm for mathematics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of new content out there, though. I mean, I just yesterday, one of my other colleagues actually gave an interview to Wired, explaining what a zero-knowledge proof was, and it was an excellent explanation. It's available on YouTube.
I'll have to check that out. And
like 2 days ago, I saw on Reddit a math rap. Someone was rapping how to solve algebraic equations in German. And
that wasn't you, was it?
No, it wasn't me. But it was hilarious, and it was completely mathematically accurate too. Actually, it was actually not. I mean, if I was teaching a pre-calculus, I would actually include that video as a supplementary.
Oh, you would?
Yeah.
Well, let me, real quickly before we get started, how would you like me to address you? Dr. Tao?
That's fine.
Dr. Tao.
Yeah,
okay.
Or Terry.
Or Terry, okay. I want you to be comfortable. I appreciate your time, Stuart. I know you get inundated with requests, so I want to be mindful of your time. So we'll go ahead and get started. But my goal is I'm working on a piece in Entrepreneur, and I'm fascinated with what you do. And I just recently interviewed Conrad Wolfram of Wolfram Alpha, so a lot of different discussions with mathematicians out there. So Stuart was kind to connect us. So we'll go ahead and get started. So, Terry, it's incredible to spend some time with you, and I think that a lot of people would look you up, right, in your past and all that you've achieved and be intimidated by the interaction with you. And I will say that you did say in your masterclass, and I took that in preps for this interview, but I love that you talked about, in essence, what I interpreted as the power of the dumb question. The value of the dumb question. So I'm going to use that as I start this discussion, is to say that I may venture into some dumb questions, but I appreciate you thinking about them within that context. I want to start with off air. I mentioned to you that I recently interviewed Conrad Wolfram of Wolfram Alpha, and Conrad has some very strong opinions about math education, and he argues in his new book, The Math's Fix, that education isn't working to elevate society with modern computation, data science, and AI, and he contends that students are subjugated to compete with what computers do best, and that they often lose. How do you feel about that, where you sit in the mathematics ecosystem, and are we missing an opportunity to understand math's role in not only the development of young people, but how it applies to the real world?
Well, certainly I think it's a changing world. I think math is needed in many, many more disciplines than it used to be. I mean, it's not just like the traditional physical sciences anymore. If you go into, say, marketing, you encounter data science. You go to medicine, if you go into healthcare, you have to encounter, statistics and probability. And so it is true that the math curriculum has to change a little bit. Now, we've always had these debates every time a new technology came out, like when calculators came out. Does this mean that we no longer had to teach our kids how to add and subtract? But you still need to, because you need the number sense. What happens if your calculator is giving you complete nonsense because you enter things incorrectly? How can you tell? So I mean, I think we can never sort of expunge the computational aspects of math education completely. But certainly there is a need to make math education more flexible, more multimodal. I think different students learn in different ways. For some people, the traditional, you sit in the classroom, you take notes, you do homework, that works very well. I mean, I enjoyed that. I actually liked, getting homework and math homework, But for other people, I mean, some people pick up math more naturally outside the classroom For example, poker enthusiasts, they pick up a lot of probability and they have very earnest discussions about mathematics, without having real formal training. But, they're just very motivated to learn a very specific type of probability that will help them play poker. People are interested in crypto, and they may learn a specific type of math just purely for that purpose, and so forth. So, it's a challenge for educators because, it's a lot easier as a teacher to just teach a single curriculum from a textbook and, give, standard homework and so forth. And now this, you have students, and they all have different interests, and they all want to use math in different ways. And you really have to be quite talented as a teacher to accommodate everybody. So, it's a tough task being an educator in the public education system. I don't envy the teachers what they do.
Yeah, no, it is incredibly difficult. As you were talking there, it made me think about someone who is proficient in jazz, right? The ability, the confidence to be unstructured. And yet, in a classroom, the power of structure allows us to analyze our results and to figure out if we're supporting students and move them along the train, I guess, from grade to grade. But yet, what I'm hearing in the way in which I experienced your masterclass, and we'll get to that in a second, was this sort of fluid nature, right? That you don't exactly know what you're going to get when you approach a challenge or a problem, but that's part of not only the enjoyment, but that process is incredibly important to the underpinnings of what mathematics brings to the experience of the one working within that problem. Is that fair?
Yes, yeah. No, the real world is messy, and in a classroom environment, there's an expectation of fairness, right? Like if they give you a homework question, it's expected that it's something that you can solve using a technique that you learned in the last 2 weeks in your class. And the real world is not like that. There are problems where you have to dig really deep in the literature, or maybe the question that was asked was actually not the right one to answer, and you have to change your problem. Or sometimes the problem is just impossible to solve with the techniques available right now, and you just have to give up. It's a tough transition for students, because they live in this sort of bubble where everything is controlled and you don't expect any trick questions or problems that can't be solved, or ones that require really creative out of the box thinking that you can't see in your textbooks. So I think as much education now happens outside the classroom as inside it. I myself, most of the mathematics I learned after my graduate education. Actually, I finished my PhD specializing in a very narrow area of mathematics, but it was only after sort of having to do real research problems and talking to people in other fields. That's when I really learned how math all fit together. I think it's the same in every profession. Say journalism. Journalism classes will only take you so far. You really need the in the field experience to pick up these. There's always stuff that are just not taught in classrooms. So you can't fault classrooms for not teaching everything. They just need to teach a core base that you can sort of develop on from there, but it should not be sort of the final endpoint of your education by any means.
Let's turn to masterclass. Why masterclass, and why at this stage in your career? The short answer is that they approached me. So about a year ago, they contacted me and said that they were interested in expanding into the science type sphere. I think most of their classes are in things like cooking or music or something. They had, I think, only 4 or 5 that you classify as science. But they thought that it was worth expanding into, and they contacted me. And I have been interested in trying to find new ways to present mathematics. I mostly give classes to undergraduate or graduate students, to people who already have had years and years of maths education. But reaching the public, the ones who didn't have a great experience, say in high school in mathematics, and they're kind of scared of it.
to them, it's just it's almost like these magic spells, right? Like these formulas are incantations with no meaning. And it's, to actually get to these people and say that actually mathematics is not so scary. It's actually, not that's different from the way you normally think in real life. It's just done very systematically and precisely. So I've been looking for a while for a way to reach that audience. I've given a few public lectures and so forth, and I'm working on a popular science book, for instance. But but I guess maybe they came at a time when I was looking for this type of activity, and they were quite professional, and they've they said they had a lot of experience in taking kind of the raw material of a lecture. But they may have some rough idea of what to present, but they have no idea how to polish it and film it in a way that is appealing. But they could handle all the editing and the production values, and making it accessible. And so it really just seemed like a good match. I think when academics like myself try on our own to reach the public, there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes. I mean, because we spent decades and decades in the ivory tower, and we kind of forget that like things that are second nature to us are not always accessible to the public. Like a certain jargon that we just use without thinking about it. The words don't have the same meaning to the general public.
Well, that's what I felt in your course. I will say that math scared me personally when I was growing up, and so it was quite intimidating to then take the class. But it was incredibly approachable, visual. It felt as if it was, and it didn't feel like it was dumbed down in any way. It was just much more. I don't know, it was personal in that way. I mean, you had a fantastic anecdote about solving a problem at an airport. I'd love for you to share that, where they were trying to figure out how to shorten times from when you got off the plane to the baggage claim. And it really wasn't about the mechanics of maybe a conveyor belt moving luggage faster from point A to point B, but it was about the journey and the process and really the psychology of the experience of that traveler that made the biggest difference. And I want to use that as sort of a backdrop, Terry, to say it feels as if that the brand of math has been increasing and growing in popularity when we think about coding. To your point around crypto and poker and betting on NFL games like we've had, that people want to understand the role math plays and that it can be fun, they can make money at it, it can be creative, all these other things. But then we have this perception issue, where the, Dr. Terry Taos of the world feels if they're at a distance, or those that are like a Conrad Wolfram, and it's hard to understand where we sort of sit. And I'm wondering if we're just approaching or we're asking the wrong questions when it comes to math, and that maybe we should be thinking about it from an entrepreneurial perspective, because it feels very much like the journey that you took me on in your master class. I could have substituted some of the language, and that would have been a class on how to become an entrepreneur and understand sort of the risk reward of what you're doing and how to maybe make calculations that could be more advantageous to your success.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for any other profession, but I can imagine, yeah, okay, so for example, one of my advice, as you said earlier, is always ask dumb questions and don't be afraid to fail. And I can imagine that is a lesson which is applicable, for example, in entrepreneurship. Although I think it's not always a one-to-one map. I mean, one thing about mathematics, Vladimir Arnold, who was a great mathematician, also a physicist, he had a saying that mathematics is the area of science where experiments are cheap. We don't need these multi-million-dollar labs to do things. We just need sort of a pen and paper or a blackboard. And so, we can try. You want to solve a math problem. You can try something, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You just wasted an hour of your time. You throw away your piece of paper, you start again. But it's not a disaster. Whereas if you're an engineer and you're building a bridge and you make a mistake and people die, that's a disaster. And maybe entrepreneurship is somewhere in the middle. Right? If you raise money to start a company and it fails, I guess a bunch of investors are out of money. But I guess you can still keep going.
Do you feel like you've entered, Terry? Do you feel like you've entered entrepreneurship, maybe not intentionally, but maybe accidentally, or just without intention? Yeah. And I mean, how do you think about that in context of your life and how people perceive you professionally?
Right. Well, yeah. The way the academic system is set up is that at the beginning of your career, like it's this publish or perish mentality. It's called, you're in a race to get a permanent position, like a tenure position, and you have to play it safe and publish lots of papers and sort of not take do anything that would really risk your reputation, and just so your research will probably follow to a large extent a well-trod path, just improving upon what previous people did. But then once you have tenure, once you have a permanent position, at least in theory, you now have the freedom to take some risks. You can do more speculative research, and you can do more speculative projects. Outreach, maybe doing something with underrepresented groups, and that's just sort of the social contract that we have. So once you get to a certain level of seniority, you are given the freedom to experiment. So so I definitely have I've had the privilege of having a secure job. So I can do things like this, and it won't jeopardize my career. If I did a masterclass and it bombed, but I just learned from it, right? I mean, it's mildly embarrassing, but it's not career destroying. If I was like a fresh out of grad school and still looking for a permanent position, then I probably would be too risky to do something like this. But that's somehow how our career path works.
How do you think about personal brand? I think that in the world of entrepreneurship, brand is incredibly important for the public, for your buyer, for your customer to understand your relationship to the product or service that you offer. And that could be mind share, right? Intellectual property. How do you think about your brand? Is it something that you have to, I know you'd rather probably, I'm going to make a guess, you'd rather not think about that on a regular basis. You'd rather be in the middle of your discipline. But now that you have a master class and people are aware of you, and they've been aware of you for years, how has that changed over time, the understanding of the brand and potentially the impact that you can have in a very positive light in embracing that brand?
Right. Well, but certainly academics care about academic reputation. I think there's a saying that academics, they work extremely hard for the grudging respect of a small number of peers. So I mean, being respected by your peers, often when you do something extremely technical and advanced, there's a small number of people who really get what you're doing, and getting any feedback from them is often extremely satisfying and meaningful. But yeah, I guess more recently I've learned that we have a brand to the wider public, and not just to each other. That mathematicians in particular, it's took me a while to realize that there is a certain respect, almost like an awe. I think when two people are debating about some facts, like whether some vaccine is effective or whatever, if one of them can cite someone and they say they can who can throw math around, then unless the other person has mathematical training, they have, it's hard to counter sort of an authority figure which is using this sort of scary math that you can't really understand. And maybe because mathematicians have managed to stay a little bit more out of political debates than most people. Like it's our maybe the authorities that we have is not quite as polarized, as politicized as with many other traditional authority figures. So there is maybe some role to play that we can still we have a voice that is still kind of heard, at least, if not understood properly. So perhaps we have some responsibility to for example, speak out against innumeracy or using statistics very badly, or just trying to educate the public I mean, I've been searching, for example, there's a lot of misinformation about, about the effectiveness of COVID vaccination and so forth. I've been trying actually on my blog to come up with a few ways to try to convey like what quantify risk and things like that. So far without too much success, I have to say. But it's important, I think, to keep having this conversation.
One thing that surprised me, Terry, in your master class, and it was a very pleasant surprise, was your you really embraced the concept of narrative. And I don't know if I had ever thought about mathematics and those that are mathematicians and the concept of narrative in the same sentence. Can you speak a little bit about that because to me it is a story component. I mean, this is, people understanding those, I think, that are at within the same, that have achieved similar heights as you have in your accomplishments, and understanding how then you can communicate and reach the public, to your earlier discussion point and desire. And one of the reasons why Masterclass came at a really good time is that narrative, to understand how, in essence, I'm not saying you are a role model, but there are kids out there that are looking sort of up at you and what you've accomplished and said, boy, maybe I could be the next Dr. Tao. And I'm wondering how much of that narrative plays a role in your active or daily thinking.
Yeah, so that's something I said before that a lot of math I learned after graduate school. This is something I definitely learned after graduate school. So throughout my education, there was almost this macho attitude that math was somehow almost anti-narrative, that here's some cold hard facts, and we're not sort of told the story of how to use them or so forth. You just expected to become very good at solving problems and pulling rabbits out of hats to answer questions, and not really seeing a big picture. The emphasis in my education was often on just pure technical mastery, without any narrative, without any sort of wider purpose. I remember actually I was a bit vague. As a student, I remember I only had a very vague idea of what mathematicians actually do. I thought there was some higher authority that would every so often give us some problems to solve, and we would solve them without knowing why. But yeah, it was only after I did research and talking to other leading mathematicians, and whenever they talked, they were always, they didn't focus on technique, and well, I mean sometimes they did, but they often wanted to say, okay, what's the story here? What are we trying to do? Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? What are we hoping to get here? And what does this story remind me of? Okay, so are there other stories in mathematics which had a similar beginning, and how do they end? How do they end up? So what can we expect will happen here? And bit by bit, I just sort of realized how important it was. And I think I read somewhere, I think there was some article that someone wrote about advice on how to give good mathematics presentations, and that I forget who it was, but someone just stressed over and over again that it's you're telling a story just like a filmmaker or a playwright or a comic, despite sort of our conceit that mathematics is somehow is more rational and less human somehow than other disciplines, it still is very important to have the same sort of narrative beats. There should be like a protagonist and an antagonist, and there should be tropes. That your story should remind the audience of other stories that they already know. Once I got that, somehow it just made math a lot more fun. It wasn't just pure technique, but.
What is I was going to say, Terry, what is your hope with Masterclass? Have you thought about that? Is that a conversation that you've had sort of at home with family because this can change the trajectory of the way the number of people that get to know you for different reasons outside of being, called the Mozart of math and these sorts of things. You're a professional in your mid-40s, and you're not the child prodigy anymore in that regard. And this could be changing the trajectory of the way in which people engage with you, want to work with you. How do you think about that? What are some of those internal conversations you're having?
I guess, I still view myself primarily as an academic, and that I would mostly interact with other people in the academic sphere. There have been a few scientists who've become public figures, like Carl Sagan, for instance, and I guess Neil deGrasse Tyson, like that. I myself, I don't kind of see myself going fully down the public scientist type, public figure type role. I hope more people in my profession do. I think there is somehow a tendency for too many of us to just stay in our ivory tower and not engage with all the outside world. What I'm hoping actually is that many other of my colleagues start doing things like this, not necessarily masterclass, but so as I was mentioning just before we started the interview, there are other colleagues who are talking to other journalists, or they're working with YouTubers to produce fairly high quality videos about science and math. And so I think it's not so much specifically myself that needs to be in the spotlight, but if more people like me are out there trying to engage, that would be better for everybody.
Are you comfortable? Are you more? I think you leaned into this just a second ago, but do you feel comfortable, or are you uncomfortable with the thought that people might think of you as an entrepreneur?
To the extent that I take risks, but from a position of safety, I have to say. I have a permanent academic position, and then I do little things like these masterclass. Okay, if you want to call that entrepreneurship, yeah, but it's not like sort of betting your entire livelihood on the success of your endeavor or something. If I quit my day job and I try to, I don't know, become a YouTube blogger or something.
Breaking news today, right?
Yeah. No, I've not tried actively. I kind of grasp the concept that I could be more active about managing my brand and have lots of social media and maybe I don't know, merchandising or something. Okay. I still see this as kind of not my primary role. If in the course of being an academic I can engage with the public without sort of having to give up on research and all my academic duties, that's great. It's possible that my career goals may change as I get older. They certainly have changed. When I was 10, 20 years ago, I only really cared about research. So it's sort of certainly it's nice that I have a certain amount of name recognition that I'm still, I guess, looking for the optimal way to use it. This masterclass is an experiment. I don't see myself doing a lot of these things in the future, or at least not specifically this. But I had a positive experience with masterclass. So if there's some other outreach project that looks like something where I can contribute and make a difference, I'd be interested, but I don't know exactly what the best use of it is, what my time is yet.
What has been the feedback or the response to them? I know it just launched, but have you had any feedback from your peers?
Okay, so my peers, they're kind of amused, I think. It's not really aimed at people who already have mathematical background.
Right, it's aimed for people like me, Terry.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're happy. My colleagues, I generally agree that we don't do enough outreach. And so outreach in any form, I think is good. On my blog, it's kind of a mixed bag. Yeah, so people are excited. The fact that it's paywalled has annoyed a bunch of people. but I mean, Masterclass is a for-profit company, and they did put a lot of effort into the production values. It was actually, I mean, it was non-trivial cost to actually produce these things. So there was some talk, would be this some way to do some open source equivalent of this, like maybe get a Patreon to do these things. Maybe, although, I mean, that's also a nice idea, but I think currently the only venue for this type of high production value content is through companies like Masterclass.
When is the last time, Terry, that you felt stumped by a problem? I think it would be very interesting for people to know what that's like for someone who, on the surface, it would appear that you are not intimidated by a problem, that you have the wherewithal to break down a problem and understand that if you break it into pieces, it's a lot easier to approach and tackle.
Maybe about 2 days ago. I mean, so I mean, every so often, I keep scouring there's these math discussion groups, and there are these preprint servers that give out new papers. And I was reading a paper by a colleague who was trying to solve a certain problem, which was in my area, and he said he couldn't solve it. And I said, but that's funny. That looks kind of easy. Let me try it. And I worked on it for like a day, and I could make some progress. But I realized that all the tricks I had could not touch the sort of the core difficulty of this problem. And it's actually a good problem, but it needs a tool that I don't have. So I made a note of it. I keep a list of open questions that I might return to someday.
And how big is that collection of questions that you might?
Pages and pages. I often don't actually go back and look as often as I should on that list. But I constantly try things and they don't work. But I don't publicize this fact. So there's definitely a selection bias in academia that you only publish things that work. I mean, it's actually a serious problem. I mean, that in science, like negative results are often not published. You try something and it fails, and that's actually useful information for other people. But it's kind of embarrassing to publish that because it doesn't sound, it doesn't look like you've accomplished anything. But
doesn't that feel like that feels like a part of the larger problem? I mean, we were talking earlier about education, right, and the lack of connection to students and then maybe applicability to their real lives. Mm-hmm. And yet in the ivory tower, if we're afraid to publish our failures, we're perpetuating this cycle of where we can't fail. It has to be perfect, In essence, like you were born this way. You didn't sort of grow along the way and learn and fail and pick yourself back up and approach a problem in a different way.
Yeah, no, the culture is changing, but that has certainly been the dominant culture in at least mathematics for decades. Like it's kind of this macho, you can only thrive here if you're this infallible genius, and that you don't reveal your methods, and you definitely don't reveal your mistakes. That is changing. I think the younger generation are more relaxed about this, and I think they gravitate more and they relate more to people who are willing to admit their mistakes, or to view the mistakes as just partial. I could solve half the problem, but not the other half. And then someone else might say, "Oh, but actually, I have an idea for how to solve the half that you couldn't solve."
What is it like, Terry, when you've solved something? So I love that. Just thinking about your peer, your colleague saying, I'm having trouble solving this, and you said, let me tackle this, and you spend a day. Let's just say that was an instance where you did solve it. I have no understanding, or I struggle to comprehend what that experience might be like. Is it akin to a natural high that you might have, or someone might have on the athletic field, or if they've closed a deal for business, or won the spelling bee? What is it like when you've solved something and you know it?
Yeah, certainly there is a high aspect to it. I think, solving the problem is definitely cool. But actually, the thing that really is the most enjoyable is the connection with the person you're working with. Like, the moment when you both see that you solved the problem, and like you can look at each other and you high five. But actually also the process, when you're both, chasing a problem down and you've almost got it. When you're on the same wavelength to somebody, it's almost like you're thinking with the same mind. You can just say the brief outline of an idea, and the other person completely gets what you're saying because they're immersed in the same task of solving the problem that you are. And it is really somehow a thrill to problem solve with somebody who is exactly on the same wavelength as you. I don't know if you've ever been so close to a friend that you can finish each other's sentences. It's happened a few times with me. And it's kind of a similar feeling to that.
I go back to jazz. If we were both, I don't know, we were jazz musicians and we met up at a jazz club that we could play because we resonated at the same decibel, that kind of a thing, or synchronized swimming, or even in athletics, you talk about it. It's like being on a string with another human being. And see, so that right there, Terry, to me is what is amazing. If I take anything from our discussion today, it's that to me, I think is going to be surprising to people, but it's so welcoming, and inspiring that it's not maybe number crunching, as I say in a very sort of cold, callous way, but it's actually the relationship. That's the experience that is euphoric for someone in your position. It's I think the general public's access to a mathematician is sadly deficient in just number of opportunities, right? I mean, the irony is one of my favorite movies growing up was Good Will Hunting, right? Mm-hmm. And so the backdrop of an incredibly bright young man, but you know why I think that I love that, if we sort of talk about guy movies or males and friendship, is the relationship that the character had with the professor. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that though, when you talked about, your colleague and giving them 5, when you've solved a problem, that's, I think, the connection that the audience feels, not the numbers and, language that we can't speak as the layman, but it's the relationship that we can relate to.
Yeah, and that's the direction in which mathematics has been trending. I mean, in the past, I think it was more the lone person, genius in the attic trope was more accurate. But mathematics is a collaborative discipline now. I mean, it's just so complicated, and no one person really can solve all these problems anymore. And people's skills have become more and more important. In math, it's actually, there is this sort of stereotype of mathematicians being, socially awkward and not even to the point where they can't interact so well with other mathematicians. But that is changing, actually. I mean, just the nature, the way we do our job, we have to be social and to work with others, and to communicate effectively.
How comfortable are you as you are in your mid-40s when you just in your own skin?
Oh yeah, that has changed. I was a lot more concerned when I was younger about looking foolish and reputation, and more self-conscious. I think it's easier to loosen up. I think there's a certain, the first time, you crack a joke in lecture. I've noticed, when a postdoc, someone fresh out of grad school teaches a class, normally they are quite nervous and they stay close to the textbook and they don't take any risks. But as you get older, you can start saying, taking a few more liberties, and you make some jokes. You might say some statements that are actually quite outrageous, but designed to provoke the students and generate discussion and so forth. And after you do this a few times, then you can get a bit more comfortable doing that. So certainly I feel like I can do that more and more. It also helps that once you get a stable job,
then you feel more secure. So talk about, if you don't mind just sharing, are you always thinking about, is your mind always running where you can't turn it off, that you are thinking about the problem that you just started to attempt to tackle, the next one that you're thinking about? Can you turn it on and off?
Well, nowadays, it sort of gets turned on and off for me. I mean, there's, I have two kids and there's always something happening at home, and, and I have always meetings with various, I'm on all these committees which are sort of about math, but not actually math. So, I no longer have these huge stretches of time where I just do mathematics, but I just have these blocks of like 2 or 3 hours every few days for something where I can think about a problem. And then because of that, when I do get an opening in my schedule and I'm not super exhausted, then I will just jump into working on something for a while. But then often something will distract me, and then I have to set it aside.
What is it?
So yeah.
What is it like,
Terry? I
have
to learn to multitask.
Talk about, we're both fathers. What is it like to be a father and to be a father that is of some celebrity, and one that is based on accomplishment, right? Like a skill set, not just social media, because it's 2022. We do have that. Do you think about that in the development of your children and how they might, in essence, assess their own achievements or growth, especially when their father has done so much, and especially in the public eye?
In some ways, so I live in Los Angeles, and so somehow I think there's a lot of celebrities around here, just in general. So like in the schools that I go to, there was a couple of children of movie stars, and people like that. And there's some children of very wealthy people. So, in a way, and while maybe I'm known in some circles, I'm not as known as a Hollywood movie star or whatever. So, I don't think, it has been made that much of a difference to me. You have to ask my kids. I mean, maybe within like in their science clubs or something, right? They may have heard of me, with their peers. But I think people adapt, so, when I was a kid, I skipped a lot of grades. And at one point, I was, my classmates were 5 years older than me. And I remember that, at the first week of class, people would stare at me and it'd be kind of weird. But, after a week or two, we'd have the same homework assignments, and I'd be at the same level as the people at the rest of my class. I have the same difficulties with the material. And I think pretty soon people just got used to it. I just happened to be a lot smaller than the classmates, but it wasn't actually that strange. So I think people are just used to adapting.
Do you find that there are social implications to that accelerated growth, or the path that you were on by skipping 5 grades?
It did mean that my social life got kind of mixed up in a different order. So like I didn't go to like social events. So like the equivalent of a prom in high school. We don't quite have the same thing in Australia, but I didn't go to these things. It was only when I went to Princeton as a graduate student at age 16 that I started hanging out with some undergraduates, and made some friends, and joined a movie club and a bridge club and things like that. And I think I had many of the social activities that you normally have in high school. I'd actually got in either college or grad school. When we started dating, once I came to UCLA. Yeah, it was mixed up for a while, but I think I got most of the experiences that a normal kid would eventually, just in a slightly different order.
What advice would you give for a young student that is very interested in mathematics and they may not know it? They may be interested in coding, or they may be interested just in sort of STEM subjects writ large. What advice would you have for them? Because I think it's fascinating. When you were younger, you talked about it here, and I know you talked about it in the master class, just not fully understanding what mathematicians did. I think it's important for young people to know what accomplished mathematicians are doing and how they are impacting planet Earth. in any number of disciplines because it allows them to set course on a path that may take them there, but it might also create a beautiful new path as well, utilizing the discipline of mathematics.
Yeah, well, if they are interested in mathematics, there are so many activities and resources now. You know, there are in the communities. There's some very high quality mathematical bloggers. There are online courses, which are many of which are free, actually. Khan Academy being a famous example, for instance. It's to give advice. I would say that it's not necessarily a race. Sometimes kids or their parents get obsessed. I must get must graduate it must be the youngest person to finish high school or whatever and get perfect grades here and so forth. And some amount of academic achievement is useful and important, but it shouldn't be your primary goal. I remember a friend who was dead set on getting into Harvard, and she was obsessed with GPA and just nothing could jeopardize her admission to Harvard. And she actually did get into Harvard as an undergraduate, and then she didn't quite know what to do next. This was her.
She'd reached the mountaintop.
Yeah, and she hadn't sort of thought of step two past that. You shouldn't fixate on any specific target, like numerical target. I must be in this university with this GPA by this year or whatever. The world keeps changing, and there may be professions that could use your talents that don't even exist right now. Who knows? You could use you could be working to train an AI to do stuff that just doesn't exist right now.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up AI because there are countries around the world that are investing exponentially more resources into the development of AI and AI's application, and yet we are far behind from what I have read here in the United States. Do you agree, or what is your perspective on the real-world implications of not actively investing in, as a society, the power of math beyond sort of a basic level of attainment that we think we need young people to have, whether or not they're going to go into mathematics as a profession or not?
Yeah, no, that will be a problem. I think in the very near term we're still okay because the U.S. is still a magnet for the best and brightest around the world. Our top universities and also top tech companies can still attract talent from all over the world. And so if domestically we're not producing enough people at the highest levels of technical training who can work on these problems, it's kind of okay. There is a long-term worry that maybe the U.S. is no longer like the dominant place to go. It used to be even 10 years ago that a student in China or India or Europe, whatever, if they wanted to get a top-class education at the graduate level, they would almost certainly want to go to a U.S. university. But the rest of the world is catching up, and sometimes actually it's the environment here has not been always completely friendly to immigrants, like all the foreign academics who come here, they all have a story to tell about the bureaucracy of getting a visa, for instance. Mm-hmm. It's not always an easy process, especially during COVID. Actually, got a lot worse. But I think at the strategic level, sort of the U.S. government has to make sure that this is still a very attractive place for really talented people to work. But yes, we also have to work on domestic, on training domestic students who are interested in to have all the opportunities to use their talents. It's a tough problem, but and you have to work to stay competitive, for sure. We can't just rest on our laurels.
Yeah, or on past successes, right?
Yeah.
Is there a Mount Everest of a problem out there that maybe you hold dear that you want to be able to tackle someday and solve? I don't even know if that is ignorance on my part, but I would think that if I had your talent, that there might be one problem that I'd say that's the one I want to be able to solve.
Yeah, no, there's a couple like that. Yeah, I mean, they're kind of technical to state. I mean, there's something called the twin prime conjecture, which is one of the oldest conjectures in number theory. At least 300 or 400 years old, maybe older. And we've been inching towards solving that, but that is like a mountaintop where we don't have, we can get sort of a third of the way up the mountain again, but at these big cliffs, we need a new tool. So I've been sort of tinkering with various easier versions of that problem over the years. There's this question about it's called the Navier-Stokes regularity problem. The colloquial problem is can water spontaneously explode? Is it possible to have some configuration of fluid which suddenly the velocity becomes infinite and it just blows up and does something very unphysical? And of course, this doesn't happen in real life. You swish water around for a while, it eventually calms down and becomes still. But there is potentially some very weird initial configuration of water that someone defies the laws of physics and it just becomes more and more agitated. And I've been trying to actually build such a solution for a while. And again, it's extremely difficult.
Do you think about the application of that solution?
It wouldn't be very practical. It is really just a theoretical. I mean, we know, I guess it's possible that one could, if one could find some configuration that is something weird, one could use it to, I don't know, design more efficient, more aerodynamic boats or something. But it's a stretch.
Would you say that challenges or problems like the ones that you mentioned that are hundreds of years old, at least in the first instance, that is a way? It's almost like what I might think of as exercise. It's not potentially that that I'm going to reach a certain goal, but it's the exercise, it's the game of it, which is very positive.
So it's these problems are kind of benchmarks for how good our technology is. They can help refine our tools, force us to develop new techniques, which could then be useful for more practical problems. So they're kind of test problems. It's basic research. It's not really directly motivated by applications, but what often tends to happen is that a technique that solved one of these basic problems for which mathematicians pursue for their own sake, 20, 30 years later, some physicist or chemist or engineer is solving some real world problem and they realize that it is similar to this really weird abstract problem that the mathematician considered 2 decades ago, and they're able to adapt whatever trick or method was used to solve that problem, solve their own problem. But this is what Eugene Wigner called the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. That mathematicians work on things with often very little regard for real world application, but often it ends up being useful much later. I think I gave an example in my master class of coin weighing puzzles, which have since been the techniques have since been used to speed up MRI scans, for instance. Give one example.
I want to circle back and put a bow on this conversation. In the beginning, I talked about Conrad Wolfram and his new book, or over the last year, The Math's Fix. And I want to also, and again, dumb question. So you gave me the opportunity to ask a dumb question, but this concept of truth by contradiction that you mentioned, or you go through in your master class, I wonder if you could apply that to this challenge that Conrad is putting out there, that's saying that, students, in his words, are subjugated to compete with what computers do best and lose. Meaning, how can we look at potentially the problem of math education, and can we do that through the application of truth by contradiction? How might we do that?
Well, we can certainly try different modes of education. There are lots of experiments where we teach in a completely different way. Like one fashionable thing these days is to have flipped classrooms. So instead of normally in class, the teacher talks, and then at home, the students do the homework and so forth. But you could definitely play with different models and see whether so in a flipped classroom, actually the students watch the lectures at home, and then in class they try to solve problems with the teacher in a much more interactive, free-form way. And so we can certainly try different ways of teaching kids that don't follow the old paradigms. And
do you think that's needed, or the time is now to do that? I mean, if we think about a COVID world of education where kids were immediately dropped into remote learning environments, it was a little bit of a flipped environment, not by choice. And I'm wondering if now would be the time to think about it. But I would imagine that one of the ingredients we would need would be, almost like a letter from the principal giving us the okay to fail, because it feels like we still are in this construct that we cannot fail. Yet when we do graduate and we're working, with professors like you at UCLA, failure is a part of the process. That's part of the enjoyment. But yet we're not instilling that at the ground floor with young people. And I think that then there's a disconnect, because if I'm not truly passionate, or I don't understand the way in which I can contribute to the field of mathematics, I'm probably going to go pursue something else because I didn't have that initial experience that said it was okay to fail. Right.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not a political starter to say, okay, I'm going to try something that may fail your kids. That means if your kids may fail, if they're educated, who's in? Who's with me? Okay. So I think for now, I mean, it's only at the fringes where, like, you can do pilot projects where the students opt in, volunteer to be part of an experiment, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I mean, there is this problem. I mean, I'm not so much engaged in these sort of school education issues, but I do know that there's this phenomenon that sometimes there are these pilot projects and they're extremely successful. The teachers invest a lot of time into making this new teaching pattern work, and they get great results. The students all come out really happy and high achieving, and then they try to scale it up and they bring in more teachers who are not as enthusiastic, and they don't quite understand what's going on, and it almost never scales up. The thing about traditional education, all is false, and like you're saying, it's dry, it's outdated, and whatever. It at least scales.
It feels like everything has to go back to scale, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're in math and education. In essence, if it doesn't scale, we don't, in essence, have time, resource, or interest in moving things forward. Yet it seems like those, going down the rabbit hole actually benefits our species.
Yeah. Isn't that called like the innovator's dilemma or something? There's some gap. I pick up the term, but between a successful pilot project and a successful scaled, mass market appeal. I forget. You probably know the term better than I do.
So Terry, let's close with this. I want to be respectful of your time, and I know you've got students probably you have to get back to, and problems to solve. If we circle up, or if I run into you in Los Angeles in 5 years, what will be your, if I say, Terry, how has it been over the last 5 years since Masterclass? How has your life changed by being more public in your expression of your talent and the impact, how are you going to assess this over time? Not maybe just Masterclass, but just your outreach to the public that you talked about earlier on in our discussion. How are you going to assess that and be able to communicate maybe how far you've come?
I don't sort of keep metrics like this.
I guess I'm speaking in the abstract, not that it would be an official thing, but it's one of those where in the same sense that you said that when you've solved something, but you're sharing that with a peer and the excitement and the exhilaration of doing that, it's the same kind of thing, right? So there may not be a number you can point to or a set of data that would speak to success or outreach and an extension of your teachings in that regard, but there's a sensibility of it, right? There's something that you can't really quantify, but just says, you know what? I have evolved, if I'm you, into this space of being somewhat of an ambassador for mathematics to support education in sort of the next generation.
Yeah, well, certainly I can see myself having just more contacts in the public engagement space, so, I mean, I met some very interesting people while doing this masterclass, and maybe because of masterclass, I will get contacted again, or more people will take my calls. If I contact some, I don't know, a TV station or something, maybe they may have heard of me more. I mean, it's network. So this was this amorphous networking effect there. And now that I've done a little bit of this public engagement, it's not as scary as I thought it was. And so it might be something that I'll be willing to do again. And in 5 years, I might be involved in another project, something to do with reaching out the public. I don't know what it would be yet. I tend to rely a lot on serendipity and to see what happens. I mean, that's how research works. Certainly, you solve a problem and then only after you solve one problem do you realize what the next step is going to be.
See, that surprises me that you would mention serendipity. I would think that maybe I've just been conditioned to think that someone in your position would not want to rely on chance in that regard, or my understanding and interpretation of serendipity is some level of chance. Well,
the analogy I like to give is that research is like an investment portfolio. You might have some very safe investments, the equivalent of bonds, or, where you have these sort of low risk, low return projects, which you kind of know how they're going to work, and you just have to put in effort. But then you have some high risk, high return type things where you're going to try something and it's kind of crazy, and if it works, it's going to be fantastic. If it doesn't work, oh well, maybe, but you still learn something. And then there'll be this extra time set aside for just random stuff that you can't even predict. These unknown unknowns, to put as Rumsfeld famously said, right? I mean, a lot of the projects that I've been most satisfied with, it just sort of came out because I was at a conference or I was meeting with another colleague, and we just talked and we just found a connection, a problem that I had that they could contribute to, or vice versa. And often there are things I worked on which a year ago I would not have imagined that I would at all be involved in.
I will say this as we wrap up, Terry. There's an approachability that I get from you that is it's such a pleasant surprise. I think that the ivory tower and people's experience with it is the exact opposite. And I think that there's a thoughtful pause to your responses that says that you're present, and I think that higher education could learn from that. So I'm hoping that Masterclass is a maybe not the first step, but it's a step in a series of steps that will allow you more platform to communicate, because I think it's important for young people who know they have a talent, but for whatever reason that talent that they have may or may not be as socially, I guess, celebrated, right? And when we're young, being good in math and science doesn't seem to be something that everybody is cheering about, right? It's about the accolades on the athletic field. But we all benefit the most from those that bring such skills that you do. So I think this is probably just the beginning for you. Your brand is getting ready to take off, and so it's just been a pleasure to spend some time with you. And anytime I can ask dumb questions, it just means I'm going to ask less of them at home. So I thank you as a husband and a father that you allowed me to do that. And continued success with all that you're doing. Hopefully Masterclass will be, like I said, the start of many things to come. And maybe we'll run into each other one day on the UCLA campus. But once again, we want to thank Dr. Terrence Tao. Terry, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. Have a great evening.
Okay, you too.
All right, bye-bye.